When her beloved son lost everything to his deceitful wife, what could one elderly mother do? You won't believe her calculated path to justice, or how she turned heartbreak into an inspiring display of strength and cunning. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. Honey, I've had mine sitting in the freezer for 6 long months, letting that frost build up real nice, just waiting for the perfect moment to serve it up on a silver platter, a platter she won't ever see coming. Her name is Crystal, though Diamond would be more fitting given how hard, cold, and greedy she turned out to be. My soon-to-be ex-daughter-in-law. The viper who slithered into my son's life, charmed him, bled him dry, and then shed him like last season's skin, leaving him a broken, hollowed-out shell of the man he once was. Oh, she thinks she's won. She's probably sunning herself on some fancy vacation right now, paid for with my son's heart and my family's future, not a care in the world. She thinks old Beatrice, that's me, is just some grieving, helpless old woman, wringing her hands over her poor, foolish boy, Leo. My Leo. He always did have a heart too big for his own good, too quick to trust, too eager to please. Crystal saw that soft spot and sank her teeth right in. If you only knew the half of what that woman did, the calculated cruelty, the layers of deceit. But you will. Oh yes, you will. Because every dog has its day, and every viper eventually meets a mongoose. And this old mongoose has been sharpening her teeth. I'm telling you this now, because when the dust settles, and Crystal is looking around wondering what avalanche just buried her, I want someone to know it wasn't just bad luck. It was a mother who never forgets. It all started so innocently, as these things often do. Leo, my sweet, gentle Leo, met Crystal at some charity gala he'd been dragged to by a friend. He was in his late 30s then, a successful architect, kind, a little lonely perhaps after his last relationship had fizzled out. And Crystal, well, Crystal was a masterpiece of deception. She was all wide, innocent eyes, flowing blonde hair, the kind that costs a fortune to maintain, I'd later learn, and a sob story about a difficult past that would make a stone weep. She was a freelance art consultant, she told him, with a passion for helping emerging artists. Turns out, her real passion was emerging with other people's money. Leo fell for it, hook, line, and sinker. He brought her home to meet me, his face alight with a joy I hadn't seen in years. I'm his mother, Beatrice, aged 68 at the time this nightmare began, and a woman who's seen a bit of life. I prided myself on my intuition. And from the moment Crystal wafted into my living room, smelling of expensive perfume and practiced charm, my internal alarm bells didn't just ring, they clanged like a 5-alarm fire. There was something in her eyes, a fleeting hardness when she thought no one was looking, a way her smile never quite reached them. She was too perfect, too agreeable, her sympathy for Leo's struggles. He wasn't struggling, he was doing just fine before she came along. A little too rehearsed. "Oh, Mrs. Dubois," she'd purred, calling me by my late husband's name, though I told her to call me B. "Leo has told me so much about you. You're practically a legend." Legendarily suspicious of gold-digging vipers, maybe. But Leo was smitten, head over heels. He saw a wounded bird he could save, a beautiful soul who just needed a little love and support. I tried to warn him, gently at first. "She seems very polished, son. Are you sure you know enough about her?" "Oh, Mama, don't be like that," he'd say, a little frown creasing his brow. "She's wonderful. She understands me. And she's had such a hard life." A hard life conning people, more like. Within 6 months, they were married. A quick, quiet ceremony at City Hall. I wasn't thrilled, but I put on a brave face for Leo. If he was happy, I'd try to be happy for him. Crystal moved into his beautiful condo downtown, the one he'd worked so hard for. And then, the changes began. Subtle at first. Leo started investing in Crystal's art ventures. Large sums of money disappearing from his accounts. "It's for our future, Mama," he'd assure me, though his eyes looked a little more stressed each time. "Crystal's got a real eye for talent. This is going to be huge." Then she convinced him to sell his condo. "It's too small for us, darling, and the market is perfect right now," and put the money into a joint account for a bigger, better place they were going to buy together. That bigger, better place never materialized. The calls from Leo became less frequent. When I did see him, he looked tired, drawn, his old easygoing nature replaced by a nervous energy. Crystal was always there, a perfectly manicured hand on his arm, her voice a sweet poison in his ear, isolating him, controlling his finances, his time, his very thoughts. She started to subtly undermine his relationship with me, with his old friends. "Mama's a bit old-fashioned, Leo. She doesn't understand modern investments." "Your friends are holding you back, darling. We need to associate with people who are on our level." The final blow came swiftly, brutally. About a year into the marriage, Leo called me, his voice a broken whisper. Crystal had left him, cleared out the joint account, which, it turned out, held not only the proceeds from his condo, but also a significant portion of his business assets, which she had somehow convinced him to liquidate and add to their investment pool. She'd filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences, and had vanished, along with nearly everything he owned. He was left with a mountain of debt, some of it run up on credit cards in his name that she'd managed for him, a shattered career. His focus had been entirely on her ventures. And a broken heart. My son, my successful, kind-hearted Leo, was ruined. Financially, emotionally, spiritually. When I saw him, truly saw him after the dust of her departure had settled, I almost didn't recognize him. The light had gone out of his eyes. He was a ghost, haunting the ruins of his life. And the rage that filled me then, the cold, hard, diamond-bright rage against that woman, Crystal, was unlike anything I had ever known. She hadn't just taken his money, she'd taken his soul. That was 6 months ago. 6 months of watching Leo try to pick up the pieces. 6 months of him drowning in shame and despair. 6 months of me comforting him, supporting him, and all the while, that cold rage in my heart was crystallizing, sharpening, into a singular, unwavering purpose. She thought she could destroy my son and walk away. She thought old Beatrice was just a footnote in her grand con. She has no idea. Mothers never forget. And this mother? This mother is about to deliver a lesson in consequences that Crystal will carry with her to her grave. The surprise I'm preparing isn't just about getting Leo's money back. Oh no. It's about justice. It's about reminding her and the world that you don't mess with a mother's child. Not while that mother still draws breath. Beatrice is full of resolve, but how exactly can an elderly woman stand up to a cunning and ruthless conwoman who has already destroyed her son's life once? Her plan for revenge is only just beginning to take shape. 6 months. 6 months I'd watched my Leo wither, his architect's hands, once so sure and creative, now trembling as he struggled to even hold a coffee cup. 6 months of him staring blankly at walls, the vibrant spark in his eyes extinguished by that she-devil, Crystal. 6 months of my own heart simmering, the initial shock and grief slowly, methodically, transmuting into a cold, hard diamond of resolve. Beatrice Dubois was not a woman to take such a betrayal lying down. Not when it came to her child. Crystal thought she'd played her final card, vanishing into the ether with Leo's life savings, his business, his very future. She had no idea I was about to deal a whole new hand, and this time the deck was stacked. My little apartment, the one I'd downsized 2 years ago after Frank passed, suddenly felt like a general's tent on the eve of battle. My weapons weren't bombs or bullets, no. An old woman like me had to be smarter than that. My weapons were patience, observation, a lifetime of understanding human nature, especially the greedy, selfish kind, and, surprisingly, the internet. Leo, in his better days, had bought me a simple tablet, Mostly so I could see pictures of his, thankfully now non-existent, cat. I'd grumbled at the time, said I was too old for such contraptions. Now, that tablet was my window into Crystal's world. She wasn't exactly hiding, the fool. Oh, she'd changed her number, deleted her old social media, the ones Leo knew about. But people like Crystal, they crave an audience. They need to flaunt their ill-gotten gains. It's in their nature. So I started digging. Late at night, when the city outside my window hummed its restless lullaby, and Leo was finally asleep in the spare room, his restless, nightmare-filled sleep, I'd be hunched over that glowing screen, my old reading glasses perched on my nose, navigating the labyrinthine pathways of the online world. It took weeks. Weeks of searching for variations of her name, her known associates, the few Leo could remember through his haze of heartbreak, the art galleries she'd supposedly consulted for, most of which turned out to be phantoms or short-lived scams. I learned about hashtags, about reverse image searches, about the digital breadcrumbs, even the cleverest vipers leave behind. And then a breakthrough. A blurry photo from some glitzy charity auction in Palm Beach, Florida. A woman with familiar blonde hair, a diamond necklace that looked suspiciously like one Leo had bought her for their first anniversary, her arm linked with a new, older, equally reptilian-looking man. The caption mentioned a Ms. Crystal Devereaux, a rising star in art investment. Devereaux. So, she'd changed her last name. Or perhaps Sterling had never been her real one to begin with. It didn't matter. I had her. Palm Beach. A world away from my quiet, working-class neighborhood. A playground for the rich and shameless. How was an old woman on a fixed income supposed to reach her there, to deliver the surprise I was so carefully nurturing in my heart? That was the next hurdle. My revenge couldn't be a rash, emotional outburst. No, it had to be cold, calculated, precise. It had to hit her where she lived, in that glittering, superficial world she clearly aspired to. It had to unravel her, thread by careful thread, just as she had unraveled my son. Leo, meanwhile, was a constant, aching reminder of why I was doing this. He'd started seeing a therapist, Dr. Evans, a kind woman I'd found through my church, but progress was slow. Some days, he'd show a flicker of his old self, talk about a building design he'd sketched, his eyes momentarily bright. Other days, he'd barely leave his room, the shame and self-blame a heavy cloak around his shoulders. "It was all my fault, Mama," he'd whisper, his voice raw. "I was so stupid, so blind." "Hush now, baby," I'd say, stroking his hair, my heart clenching. "You were in love, and she was a professional. You're not the first good man to be taken in by a pretty face and a pack of lies. But you will be the last one she fools like this, I promise you that." My words seemed to offer him little comfort then, but they fueled my own resolve. Every tear he shed, every sleepless night he endured, every dream she had stolen from him, I was collecting them all, adding them to the weight of the justice I intended to deliver. My plan began to take shape, slowly, carefully, like one of my intricate quilt patterns. It wasn't about violence or public screaming matches. No, my revenge would be quieter, more insidious. It would be about truth. Crystal had built her new life, her new identity, on a foundation of lies and stolen money. All I had to do was find the right lever, the right pressure point, and watch it all come tumbling down. The first step was to understand her new world, her new connections in Palm Beach. That slimy-looking man in the photo with her, who was he? What were his vulnerabilities? What secrets did he have? People like that, they always have secrets. I started small. I used some of the money Frank had left me, the emergency fund I'd guarded so fiercely, and thankfully, hidden well from David's earlier requests, to hire a discreet online investigator. Not a flashy private eye, but a quiet, meticulous woman who specialized in financial tracing and background checks. I gave her Crystal's new name, the photo, the Palm Beach connection. Find out everything you can about her and about the man she's with, I told her. I want to know where her money comes from, where it goes, and who she's treading on to get it. It was a gamble, spending that precious money. But I had a feeling it would be an investment that paid dividends. Crystal had gambled with my son's life. Now I was gambling on her downfall. And I had a feeling my odds were a whole lot better. After all, I had something she clearly lacked: a lifetime of patience and a mother's righteous fury. The waiting was the hardest part. Days turned into a week, then 2. Every ping from my tablet made my heart leap, hoping it was Miss Evans, the online investigator I'd hired, with news. In the meantime, I focused on Leo. He was still fragile, like a bird with a broken wing, but the raw, bleeding edges of his despair were slowly, painstakingly, beginning to scar over. He started sketching again, his architect's mind finding some small solace in lines and forms, though his creations were mostly abstract now, full of sharp angles and shadowed spaces, a map of his inner turmoil, I supposed. He still blamed himself, still replayed Crystal's deceptions in his mind, searching for the moment he should have known, the red flag he'd missed. "How could I have been so blind, Mama?" he'd ask, his voice thick with a shame that tore at my heart. "Love is blind, baby," I'd tell him, smoothing his hair, a gesture that transported me back to his childhood. "Especially when the other person is working so hard to keep the blindfold on. She was a con artist, Leo. A professional. It's not your fault she targeted you." I didn't know if he believed me, but I kept saying it. He needed to hear it. And I needed to believe it too, to keep my own rage focused on its true target, Crystal Devereaux, or whatever her real name was. Then, finally, the email from Miss Evans arrived. It was concise, professional, and utterly devastating for Crystal. My new daughter-in-law, a term I used in my head with a silent, venomous hiss, had indeed reinvented herself in Palm Beach. She was passing herself off as a wealthy art consultant and philanthropist, ingratiating herself with the older, moneyed set. The man she was with, a Mr. Alistair Finch, was a recently widowed, very wealthy, and apparently very lonely retired commodities broker in his late 70s. Crystal, it seemed, had a type. But here was the kicker. Miss Evans had dug into Crystal's supposed art investments, and her much-touted charity work. The investments were mostly smoke and mirrors, small, insignificant pieces bought at inflated prices from galleries that seemed to exist only on paper, a classic setup for moving or laundering money. And her charity, the Crystal Devereaux Foundation for Emerging Artists, had exactly one beneficiary: Crystal Devereaux herself. Its bank account, newly opened, was steadily growing, likely with funds siphoned from Mr. Finch, just as she had done with Leo. And then, the cherry on top. Miss Evans had found something Crystal had tried very hard to bury: a string of previous identities, a pattern of similar relationships with older, wealthy men across several states, each ending with her vanishing and the man left significantly poorer. She wasn't just a gold digger, she was a serial predator, a black widow weaving her webs from city to city. And most deliciously, Miss Evans had found a few names, a few contacts, other victims, other jilted families, who might be very interested to know where Ms. Devereaux was currently plying her trade. A slow, cold smile spread across my face as I read the report. This was it. This was the lever. Crystal's entire persona in Palm Beach, her carefully constructed image of wealth, sophistication, and philanthropy, was a house of cards built on a foundation of lies and stolen money. All it would take was a well-aimed puff of truth to bring it all crashing down. My surprise for Crystal was beginning to take on a very definite, very satisfying shape. It wouldn't involve threats or violence, no. That wasn't my style. My revenge would be far more elegant, far more public, and infinitely more damaging to someone like her. I would orchestrate her unmasking. I looked over at Leo, who was sketching quietly at the small kitchen table. a faint line of concentration between his brows. He still looked haunted, but there was a spark of life in his eyes that hadn't been there weeks ago. He was healing, slowly. And knowing I now had the means to ensure Crystal wouldn't do this to anyone else, to ensure she wouldn't continue to enjoy the fruits of his devastation, filled me with a sense of righteous power I hadn't felt in years. The old Beatrice, the quiet, long-suffering mother, was still there. But now, she had an iron core. And Crystal Devereaux was about to find out just how sharp a mother's love, when forged into the blade of justice, could be. Beatrice is now armed with knowledge about Crystal's past and her current machinations. Her plan for revenge is taking clear shape. But how exactly is she going to expose this experienced con artist in her own world of luxury and deceit? And might it backfire on her? The investigator's report on Crystal Devereaux, or whatever her name du jour happened to be, became my Bible. I read it a dozen times, highlighting key names, dates, and, most importantly, potential vulnerabilities. Alistair Finch, her current 70-something sugar daddy in Palm Beach, was obviously the primary target. If I could expose Crystal to him, truly expose her for the predatory viper she was, her luxurious new life would crumble like a sandcastle in a hurricane. But it had to be done carefully. A direct accusation from an unknown old woman in Macon, Georgia, would be dismissed out of hand. No, this required finesse, a surgeon's precision. My little tablet, once a source of mild frustration, was now my command center. Ms. Evans, the investigator, had been worth every penny of Frank's emergency fund. She'd not only provided the background dirt on Crystal, but had also, at my discreet request, identified a few key socialites in Finch's Palm Beach circle. The kind of women who thrived on gossip, who held sway in those rarefied circles, and who would most definitely not appreciate a con artist preying on one of their own, especially if it made them look foolish by association. My plan was simple, yet, I hoped, devastatingly effective. Anonymous information, carefully curated, delivered to the right people. Not to Finch directly, not at first. That might make him defensive, make Crystal suspicious. No, I'd plant the seeds of doubt amongst his peers, let the whispers start, let the questions begin to brew. Using a new, untraceable email address, I'd learned how to set up, thank you, library computer classes for seniors. I began to craft my messages. Each one was a masterpiece of subtle insinuation, a carefully worded summary of Crystal's past exploits, always referencing verifiable, or soon-to-be verifiable, once they started digging, facts from Miss Evans's report. I'd include a tantalizing snippet, a previous name she'd used, the state where another wealthy benefactor had been fleeced, just enough to pique their interest, to make them wonder, to start their own discreet inquiries. I sent the first few emails to two of Palm Beach's most notorious society hostesses, women whose names had appeared alongside Finch and Crystal in several online gossip columns about recent charity galas. Then I waited. It was like fishing. You cast your line and then you wait, patiently, for a bite. During this tense period of waiting, Leo continued his slow, arduous climb back to the light. He was attending his GA meetings regularly now, sometimes even speaking up, sharing his own painful story. He'd started sketching architectural designs again, not just abstract expressions of his pain, but real buildings, innovative and beautiful. The spark was returning to his eyes, fragile, yes, but definitely there. He'd even started helping me around my small apartment, fixing a leaky faucet, organizing my cluttered bookshelves, small acts of normalcy that felt like monumental victories. He never asked about Crystal. It was as if a part of him needed to believe she had simply vanished, a bad dream he was slowly waking from. I didn't disillusion him, not yet. He needed to heal, to rebuild his own strength, before he could face the full truth of her calculated malevolence, or the details of his mother's quiet, methodical quest for justice on his behalf. My actions were my own secret now, my own burden to bear, my own grim satisfaction to savor when the time came. The first sign that my carefully laid bait had been taken came about 3 weeks later. Ms. Evans, who I'd kept on a small retainer to monitor the Palm Beach social scene online, sent me an email with a link to a local society blog. The headline was discreet, but the implications were explosive. Questions arise about Alistair Finch's new companion. The article was vague, full of innuendo about a mysterious blonde with a shadowy past, who had charmed her way into Finch's affections. It mentioned rumors of other names, other cities, other disappointed gentlemen. A slow, cold smile touched my lips. The whispers had started. The seeds of doubt were sprouting. A few days after that, another tidbit from Miss Evans. Alistair Finch had abruptly cancelled his planned appearance with Crystal at a major charity ball. The official excuse was a sudden indisposition, but the gossip columns were buzzing. Crystal apparently had attended alone, looking strained and, for once, not quite so perfectly composed. Good, let her sweat. Let her wonder where the whispers were coming from, whose invisible hand was suddenly tugging at the threads of her carefully woven facade. My surprise was a slow-acting poison, not a quick stab in the back. I wanted her to feel the walls closing in, to experience the same creeping dread she had inflicted on my son. I sent another round of anonymous emails, this time with slightly more specific, but still deniable information, to a wider circle of Finch's acquaintances, and even to one particularly tenacious local investigative reporter, whose name Miss Evans had provided. I merely suggested they might find Crystal Devereaux's background, particularly her financial dealings and previous identities, a topic of considerable interest. The beauty of it was its deniability. I was just an old woman in Macon, Georgia, tending my son and my memories. Who would ever suspect me? Leo, oblivious to my machinations, was actually showing signs of improvement. He'd started volunteering at a local community center, helping underprivileged kids with their homework, using his architectural skills to help them design a new playground. He was smiling more, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. Seeing him like that, seeing him slowly reclaim his life, his purpose, was the fuel that kept my own resolve burning bright. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about clearing the path for Leo's future, ensuring that Crystal's shadow would never fall across his life again. The next update from Miss Evans was the one I'd been waiting for. Alistair Finch had hired his own team of private investigators to look into Crystal. Apparently, the anonymous tips, coupled with her increasingly nervous behavior, had finally broken through his infatuation. "He's a meticulous man, Mr. Finch," Miss Evans wrote. "Used to due diligence in his business dealings. He won't stop until he knows everything. I suspect Miss Devereaux's days in Palm Beach are numbered." Numbered. I savored that word. My quiet, patient campaign, waged from my little apartment with nothing but a tablet and a mother's righteous anger, was working. Crystal Devereaux, the con artist, the viper, was about to find out that Beatrice Dubois, the old burden, was not someone to be trifled with. Her carefully constructed world was on the verge of a spectacular collapse, and I had lit the fuse. Crystal doesn't yet know who is behind her problems, but the clouds are gathering over her. Can Beatrice see her plan through to the end and achieve the con woman's full exposure? And how will it affect Leo when he learns the truth about his mother's actions? The call from Miss Evans came on a crisp October morning, the kind where the air feels sharp and clean, promising change. I was sitting by my window mending one of Leo's old sweaters, a familiar, comforting task, when my little tablet chirped. My heart gave a familiar lurch. "B." Ms. Evans' voice was calm, but I could hear the suppressed excitement beneath it. "It's done. Alistair Finch knows everything, and I mean everything. The previous names, the string of fleeced fiancés, the shell charity, even the details of what she did to Leo. He apparently confronted her last night at some high society soiree. Witnesses said it was spectacular. A slow, cold satisfaction uncurled within me, a feeling I hadn't allowed myself to fully embrace until this moment. Spectacular. I hoped it was. I hoped Crystal felt every ounce of the humiliation and exposure she so richly deserved. "What happened?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. "From what I've gathered from my Palm Beach sources, and they are buzzing like a hive of angry bees, let me tell you." Finch publicly denounced her, called her a predator and a fraud in front of everyone who mattered in their little world. He threw her out of his mansion then and there, apparently with nothing but the designer dress on her back, and that ridiculously expensive dog she was always parading around. Her accounts, the ones Finch had access to, have been frozen. Her foundation for emerging artists is being investigated for fraud. And the best part? At least 2 other gentlemen from her past, whom Finch's investigators also tracked down, are now considering pressing charges. I closed my eyes, a single silent tear tracing a path down my cheek. Not a tear of sadness, no. A tear of profound, almost painful relief. Justice. It had a bitter taste sometimes, but oh, it was satisfying. "Thank you, Ms. Evans," I said, my voice thick. "Thank you for everything." "My pleasure, Bee," she replied warmly. "It's not often we get to see such a comprehensive victory. You played a dangerous game, but you played it smart." A dangerous game. Yes, it had been. Waging a war from my tiny apartment, using nothing but my wits, a tablet, and Frank's emergency fund. But the stakes had been too high to do nothing. Leo's life, his spirit, had been on the line. I told Leo that evening. Not all the sordid details of Crystal's past cons, nor the full extent of my own machinations. Just that Alistair Finch had discovered Crystal's true nature, that her game in Palm Beach was over, and that she was facing serious trouble. He listened quietly, his expression unreadable at first. He'd been making such good progress, working part-time at a community drafting office, his sketches regaining their old confidence, even a hint of his old humor returning. I'd worried that hearing about Crystal again, even about her downfall, might set him back. When I finished, he was silent for a long time, staring out the window at the city lights. Then he turned to me, and there were tears in his eyes, but also something else. A lightness I hadn't seen since before Crystal. "So, it wasn't just me then," he said softly. She really was just bad." "Yes, baby," I said, my heart aching for him. "She was. And you were just one of many good people she hurt." He nodded slowly. "And Finch, he got wise to her?" "He did," I confirmed. "Seems like she finally tangled with someone who had the resources to expose her properly." He was quiet again. Then he looked at me, a long, searching look. "You had something to do with that, didn't you, Mama?" I met his gaze steadily. "Let's just say a little bird whispered some truths in the right ears, Leo. Sometimes, even an old mother hen can find a way to protect her chick, even after the fox has been in the henhouse." A small, watery smile touched his lips. He didn't press for details. He didn't need to. He simply stood up, came over to where I was sitting, and wrapped his arms around me in a hug so tight, it almost took my breath away. "Thank you, Mama," he whispered into my hair. "Thank you for everything, for never giving up on me." In that moment, all the sleepless nights, all the fear, all the cold calculation of my revenge, it all felt worth it. This was my true victory, not Crystal's ruin, but Leo's first real step towards reclaiming his own life, his own self-worth. The news about Crystal continued to trickle in over the next few weeks, mostly through sensational online gossip sites that Ms. Evans would gleefully forward. Apparently, she'd tried to flee, but with her assets frozen and her reputation in tatters, her options were limited. The last I heard, She was facing multiple lawsuits and a fraud investigation in Florida. Her beautiful, poisonous world had indeed crumbled. I didn't rejoice in her misery, not exactly. But I felt a profound sense of closure. A chapter had ended. A terrible, destructive force had been neutralized. My surprise for her, the one I'd been quietly preparing, wasn't just her public exposure. It was something more lasting, something that would, as I'd intended, remind her that mothers never forget. Using a portion of the funds Mr. Abernathy had managed to recover from the accounts Caroline had pilfered from me, a separate though related battle that was also slowly turning in my favor. And with some of the initial donations to the Frank Periwinkle Foundation, we established a special new initiative, the Leo Dubois Second Chance Fund. Its purpose was to provide small grants and support to individuals who had been victims of financial fraud and con artists, helping them get back on their feet, access counseling, and rebuild their lives. The fund wouldn't make headlines in Palm Beach. Crystal would probably never even hear about it directly. But I knew, and Leo knew. And that was enough. It was my way of turning the poison she had spread into an antidote, of creating something good and hopeful from the wreckage she had left behind. I was sitting on my porch swing one crisp November afternoon, a year to the day since I'd received that eviction notice, when Leo came out with 2 mugs of tea. He looked good, really good. His eyes were clear, his step confident. He was working full-time again with a small architectural firm, his designs earning praise. He was even dating someone new, a kind, sensible woman from his GA group. He handed me a mug and sat beside me. We watched the autumn leaves drift down from the old maple tree in my small yard. "You know, Mama," he said quietly after a comfortable silence, "I think about her sometimes, Crystal." I held my breath. "And I don't feel anger anymore, or even much sadness. Mostly I just feel pity for how empty she must be inside to do the things she did." He took a sip of his tea. "And then I feel grateful, so incredibly grateful, for you." He looked at me, his eyes full of a love and respect that warmed me to my soul. "You saved me, Mama, in more ways than one. You showed me what real strength, real love looks like." "Oh, Leo," I said, my voice thick. "I just did what any mother would do." "No, Mama," he said, shaking his head. "Not any mother. You did. You always do." And in that moment, watching the golden leaves fall, sipping my tea beside my son, my healed, recovering son, I felt a peace so profound, so complete, it felt like a blessing. The rage was gone. The need for revenge was sated, not by Crystal's destruction, but by Leo's restoration, by the quiet, enduring strength of our bond. I had shown them all right. I'd shown Crystal that her deceit had limits. I'd shown Leo that he was loved beyond measure. And I'd shown myself that even an old woman, armed with nothing but a mother's love and a refusal to give up, could indeed move mountains. Or at least make sure the vipers didn't win. Crystal is defeated, and Leo is on the path to healing. Beatrice has achieved justice for her son. But what will her own life be like now that the storm has subsided? The final chapter will tell of her peace and new meaning. It's funny, the things you think will bring you lasting peace. For months, my world had revolved around bringing Crystal Devereaux to justice, around seeing her stripped of her ill-gotten gains, her false persona shattered. And when it happened, when Ms. Evans confirmed that Crystal was entangled in so many lawsuits and investigations that she'd likely spend the rest of her days looking over her shoulder or trying to con her way out of yet another courtroom, there was a definite, sharp satisfaction. A grim job well done. But peace? That came later, softer, and from a different source entirely. The years that followed were quiet, in the best possible way. The Frank Periwinkle Foundation for Elder Advocacy and Support, bless its heart, became my gentle purpose. I wasn't out there fighting dragons anymore, Not directly. Mr. Abernathy and Miss Diaz handled the legal battles for our clients, those other Agneses and Samuels who'd been wronged. My role was quieter, listening to their stories, offering a sympathetic ear, sometimes a bit of hard-won advice. I helped Martha Henderson sort through applications, my old secretarial skills dusted off and put to good use. There was a profound contentment in it, in knowing that the darkness I had waded through could now illuminate a path for others. That was a revenge sweeter than any I could have initially imagined, turning Crystal's poison into medicine. My Leo blossomed. It wasn't overnight, and the scars from Crystal's treachery would likely always remain, a faint tracing on his soul. But he healed. He truly did. He met a woman, a lovely, down-to-earth schoolteacher named Susan, who saw him for the kind, gentle man he was, not for what she could get from him. They married quietly, a small ceremony in my backyard, under the shade of Frank's old maple tree, surrounded by roses and genuine affection. Watching him look at Susan, his eyes clear and full of a mature, steady love, was a balm to my heart that no amount of money or revenge could ever have provided. He started his own small architectural firm, focusing on sustainable, affordable housing projects for the community. He poured his talent not into chasing grandiosity, but into creating real homes for real people. And sometimes, he'd bring his designs over, spread them out on my kitchen table, and we'd talk for hours like we used to, before Crystal's shadow had fallen over us. He never spoke of her again, and neither did I. Some doors are best left closed, some ghosts laid to rest. As for Crystal, her name would occasionally pop up in some obscure online article Ms. Evans would forward me with a wry note. Always some new scheme, some new state, always one step ahead of total ruin, but never quite managing to recapture her former glittering facade. She was a phantom, a cautionary tale. And I realized with a startling clarity one day that I rarely thought of her anymore. The burning rage had cooled, replaced by a kind of weary pity, and then, finally, by a blessed indifference. She was no longer a part of my story or Leo's. She had become irrelevant, and that, I think, was the truest way I showed them all, by living well, by finding joy again, by refusing to let her poison define me or my son. The money, the unexpected fortune that had once seemed so monstrous, so alien, settled into a quiet background hum in our lives. Most of it was tied up in the foundation, of course, doing its good work. What remained for me ensured I would never again face the terror of homelessness, that I could live out my days in Frank's house with simple dignity. Able to help Leo and Susan if they ever needed it. Able to spoil my grandchildren when they eventually arrived, which they did, two beautiful, boisterous boys who filled my old house with laughter and sticky fingerprints. I never became one of those wealthy old ladies dripping in jewels, flitting off to Palm Beach. My life remained simple. My joys were small but profound. The first bloom on Frank's prize rose bush each spring, the taste of a perfectly ripe peach in summer, the comfortable silence of an evening spent reading a good book, the sound of my grandchildren's laughter. Sometimes, I'd sit on my porch swing just like I did that November afternoon a lifetime ago, and think about it all. The betrayal, the fight, the unexpected turns. And I'd marvel at the resilience of the human heart, at its capacity to endure, to heal, to love again, even after being shattered. Mothers never forget. That's what I'd thought, what had fueled my quest for justice. And it's true. I haven't forgotten the pain, the fear, the anger. But I also haven't forgotten the love, the 53 years with Frank, the joy of raising Leo, the quiet strength I found within myself when I thought all was lost. And what I choose to remember most vividly now, what I choose to carry with me into whatever time I have left, is not the bitterness of betrayal, but the enduring sweetness of that love, and the quiet, steady peace of a life reclaimed, a life lived with purpose, a life that is, finally, truly, my own. I showed them all, yes. But more importantly, I showed myself. And that, I reckon, is the only victory that truly matters.